Hello everyone. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment with where you from and what time it is. That way, YouTube will keep pulling you stories like this. Now, let the shadows take over. When I first moved into the apartment, I thought I'd finally done it. Finally carved out a space that was mine alone. I'd lived with roommates my entire adult life, and I was done with it. Done with other people's dishes, other people's noise, and other people's drama. 6 months of peace and quiet. That's all I wanted. The building wasn't much to look at. 3 floors, beige siding faded under the Colorado sun, metal railings chipped with rust. The shape of the building wrapped in a big U around a parking lot that barely fit all the tenants' cars. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly of dust and overcooked vegetables from someone's unit. The laundry room was in the basement, and the flickering fluorescent lights there made it look like a set from an old horror movie. Still, it was cheap, and it was mine. My place was 6A, on the 2nd floor, right across from 6B. I met the man in 6B on my 2nd day. I was carrying a box of dishes up the narrow stairwell when I saw him coming down from the 3rd floor. He stopped halfway, forcing me to pause. He was older, mid to late 50s, with pale, waxy skin and thinning hair combed into a side part that didn't really hide the bald patches. His glasses were thick enough to make his eyes look unnaturally large. We just stood there for a second before I said, "Hey, how's it going?" He tilted his head slightly, not blinking. "I've been watching you move in." It wasn't friendly, it wasn't curious. It was factual, like he was telling me it had been raining earlier. I gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah, I'm almost done." I stepped sideways to pass him, but he didn't move right away. Only after a pause did he shift just enough for me to squeeze by, still watching me as I went. I told myself he was probably just socially awkward. Plenty of people were. That first week I started noticing him a lot more. Every time I left for work or came home, he was out in the hall, leaning against the railing, standing in his doorway, or sitting on the stairs. Always watching, rarely speaking. Once I came back from grocery shopping and found him sitting on the top step, elbows resting on his knees, eyes locked on my door. "Evening," I said, juggling bags. He just stared at me until I unlocked my door and went inside. The first truly unsettling thing happened about a week later. It was around midnight when I came home from my diner shift. The hallway was dim. One of the overhead lights had burned out and the other was flickering. As I reached the landing, I noticed his door was open a few inches. The inside of his apartment was completely dark, but I could see him standing there, perfectly still, facing me. "Have a good night," I muttered, unlocking my own door. He didn't answer. I told myself it was just weird neighbor behavior. Nothing more. Then, 2 weeks in, it started. It was around 2 in the morning. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard 3 slow taps on my bedroom wall. My bed was against the wall we shared. I froze listening. 30 seconds later, tap, tap, tap. Curiosity got the better of me. I knocked once. There was a pause, then 3 taps back, perfectly spaced. It happened again the next night, and the night after that. Sometimes it was tapping, sometimes faint scratching like fingernails dragging slowly over drywall, always between 1 and 3 a.m. The first time I heard whispering, I knew this wasn't innocent. It was a Tuesday. I'd just started to drift off when I heard a low male voice through the wall, too muffled to make out every word, but I caught, "She's sleeping now. Just wait." I didn't move, didn't breathe. Every muscle in my body went tight. The next morning, I knocked on his door. No answer, but I thought I saw movement through the blinds. Then came the objects. First, a single marble placed dead center on my doormat. A few days later, a burned-down candle. The next week, a Polaroid photo of the building taken from the parking lot. No note. No explanation. I didn't even own a Polaroid camera. In early December, I stayed at a friend's place overnight. When I came home the next morning, my doormat was gone. In its place was a thick rubber mat that read, "I've been expecting you." Inside, everything looked normal, until I noticed my bedroom window latch was flipped open. I never open that window and I never leave it unlocked. That's when I called the police. 2 officers came, took my statement, and went to speak to him. I stood in my doorway, listening to the muffled voices. After a few minutes, they came back. Dennis, that's what his mailbox said, claimed he hadn't been home in days and knew nothing about the mat or the window. Without proof of a break-in, they couldn't do anything. I bought extra locks, a door bar, and a small security camera for my living room. Things went quiet for a couple of weeks. I almost convinced myself it was over. Then I saw him at the grocery store. I was in the cereal aisle when I noticed him at the far end, peeking around the corner. When I looked up, he didn't duck away, just stared. I grabbed what I needed, checked out, and headed to my car. He was leaning against the cart return. "Cold out," he said as I passed. "Yep," I muttered, unlocking my car. The next morning, there was another Polaroid outside my door. This one of me in the grocery store parking lot, walking to my car. A few days later, I was doing laundry in the basement when the lights flickered and went out for several seconds. When they came back on, Dennis was standing in the doorway. "You should lock your door upstairs," he said flatly. "I always do," I lied. He smiled. "Not always," then walked away. By February, I was leaving my TV on all night. One Thursday, I came home from work, tossed my keys on the coffee table, and froze. Sitting in the center was a Polaroid of me asleep in my bed. I went straight to the camera footage. At 9:12 a.m., my front door opened. Dennis stepped inside like he'd done it 100 times. He walked into my bedroom, stood over me for nearly 5 minutes, then backed out. Before leaving, he placed the photo on the table. I called 911. The cops came, reviewed the footage, and arrested him that night. They found dozens of Polaroids in his apartment. Me cooking, me brushing my teeth, me in the shower through the steam. He had a key from the previous tenant, a woman who'd broken her lease after filing multiple complaints. He was charged with burglary and stalking. I moved out within the week. And even now, in a different city, I wake up certain someone's standing in the dark, watching me breathe. I had just moved to Asheville, North Carolina in late September, chasing a fresh start after a messy breakup and a job that made me feel like a ghost in my own life. I found a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place that looked better in the listing photos than in real life. The carpet was worn, the paint chipped, and the hallway smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how often the landlord swore he had handled it. But it was cheap, quiet, and close to my new job at a bookstore. The first few weeks were uneventful. I worked, I came home, I cooked basic dinners, and I read until I fell asleep. I didn't know any of my neighbors except for the guy directly across from me, a mid-30s man named Doug who wore old baseball caps and always smelled faintly of cigarettes. We'd exchanged a few nods in the hallway, but never talked much. The building was small, only 8 units total, and most of the tenants kept to themselves. That first Friday in October, I came home from work around 9:30 p.m., arms loaded with groceries. My keys were in my teeth while I fumbled to unlock the door, and that's when I noticed something strange. My apartment door was open. Just slightly, just enough that the latch wasn't engaged. I froze. I knew I had locked it that morning. Pushing it open, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening. The place looked normal at first glance. My books were still on the shelf. The TV was in place, the kitchen light humming quietly. But there was a subtle shift in the air, like the scent of someone else's cologne faintly lingering. I set the groceries on the counter, grabbed the heaviest thing in reach, a cast iron skillet, and moved slowly through each room. Nothing. No one hiding in the closet, no signs of forced entry. Nothing missing. I told myself maybe I had rushed out that morning and simply forgot to lock it. Still, I double-locked it before going to bed that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a soft creak in the living room. At first, I thought it was the building settling, but then I heard the faintest shuffle of footsteps. My throat tightened. I sat up, heart hammering, and strained to hear. Silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, I heard breathing. Slow, steady, not my own. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but before I could even dial, I heard the sound of my front door clicking shut. Whoever was inside had just left. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the door and found the lock perfectly intact. No scratches, no damage, no sign of tampering. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? I think someone came into my apartment, but I can't prove it, and nothing was taken. They'd probably tell me to change the locks, which I did immediately. I went to the hardware store, got a deadbolt, and installed it myself. For about a week, nothing happened. I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe a dream blending into reality in the middle of the night. Until one evening, I came home to find a small, neatly folded piece of paper slid under my door. It was blank. Completely blank. I picked it up, flipped it over, even held it to the light to see if something had been written and erased. Nothing. But the paper was cold to the touch, like it had just come from outside in the autumn air. That night, I woke again around 2 a.m. The apartment was quiet. No creaks, no footsteps, but something felt wrong. My bedroom door, which I always closed before bed, was slightly ajar. I could see the faint glow from the streetlight outside spilling through the gap. I told myself not to get up, not to give whoever it was the reaction they wanted. But my pulse was in my throat, and every nerve in my body was screaming to move. I slid out of bed as quietly as possible, picked up the skillet again, and moved toward the door. As I stepped into the hallway, my bare foot landed on something smooth. I crouched down, heart pounding, and found another piece of paper. This one wasn't blank. It had 3 words written in neat block letters. I like watching. I didn't sleep at all after that. I sat on the couch with every light in the apartment on, skillet in my lap, and my phone ready to call 911. But no one came in. The next morning, I went straight to the landlord. I told him someone was getting into my apartment. He sighed like I was being dramatic and insisted it was impossible. Locks are fine. No master key besides mine, and I haven't been in your place, he said. When I demanded to know if any previous tenants had complained, he shrugged and muttered something about people hearing things in old buildings. I left more paranoid than before. 2 nights later, I was in bed when I heard a sound that turned my blood cold. The click of my front door unlocking. Not forced, not kicked. Just unlocking. I grabbed my phone, whispered to 911 that someone was in my apartment, and the dispatcher told me to stay quiet and stay on the line. My bedroom door creaked open slowly. I could see a figure in the dark. Tall, thin, wearing a hooded sweatshirt. He didn't say a word. He just stood there. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. The dispatcher kept asking if I was safe, and I couldn't even answer. The man took one slow step toward me. That snapped something inside me. I grabbed the skillet from beside my bed and swung as hard as I could. He ducked back and I bolted past him, sprinting out into the hallway. I ran straight to Doug's apartment and banged on the door until he opened it, bleary-eyed and confused. He pulled me inside just as the man stepped out of my apartment into the hall. Doug shouted at him, but the guy just turned and walked down the hallway toward the stairs. No rush, no fear, just casual, like he'd accomplished what he came for. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the building but found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of him in my apartment except for one thing, another piece of paper on my pillow. This one had 5 words. Next time you won't run. I didn't stay long enough to find out if he meant it. I moved out the next day, but sometimes when I'm alone at night in my new place, I still think about the way he stood there in the dark. Patient, quiet, like he'd been in my apartment 100 times before. And worst of all, he never knocked. I'd been in my apartment for a little over a year when the first weird thing happened. It was a Tuesday night in mid-November, one of those cold New England evenings where the wind whistles through the gaps in the old window frames. My building was old, creaky floors, pipes that clanged like someone was knocking from inside the walls, and neighbors you could hear sneezing 2 doors down. So at first, the sound didn't faze me. It was faint, almost like a cat scratching somewhere inside the wall behind my bed. I didn't have pets, so I figured maybe a squirrel or something got into the attic space. I made a mental note to call the landlord in the morning and went back to scrolling on my phone, but the scratching didn't stop. It got slower, like fingernails dragging instead of claws, and then I heard breathing. I sat there, frozen, my phone still in my hand. It was subtle, like someone trying not to be heard, just on the other side of the drywall. I told myself it had to be one of the neighbors. Maybe sound carried weird in the building. I turned up the TV and tried to ignore it, but I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I mentioned it to my landlord, Mr. Keating. He was in his late 60s, a gruff guy with a permanent coffee mug in his hand and no time for nonsense, as he called it. Probably mice, he said, waving me off. Old building like this, they get in anywhere. I'll send an exterminator next week. Next week. That wasn't exactly comforting, but I didn't push it. I went to work, came home, and by nightfall, the scratching was back. Only this time it wasn't just behind the bed, it moved. I could track it from the bedroom wall to the living room, slow and deliberate, and once again, that breathing followed. I moved to the couch, figuring I'd watch TV until I fell asleep, but at around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the kitchen faucet dripping. Except, it wasn't dripping when I went to bed, and when I got up to check it, the dripping stopped before I even reached the sink. It went on like that for days. Small, unsettling things that seemed random, but all happened when I was alone. My keys, which I always left on the hook by the door, were found on the kitchen counter one morning. The cabinet where I kept my cereal was standing open when I got home from work, and twice I swore I smelled cigarette smoke in my apartment, even though I didn't smoke, and the building was strictly non-smoking. The real breaking point came about 2 weeks later. I'd been sitting in bed reading when I heard it again, the slow scratch behind my headboard. This time, I pressed my ear to the wall, determined to figure out exactly where it was coming from. That's when I heard it. A man's voice, low and muffled, whispering something I couldn't quite make out. I jerked back like I'd been shocked, heart pounding. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call someone. But who? The police? And say what? That I heard whispering in my wall. They'd think I was losing it. I sat there for maybe a full minute before curiosity got the better of me. I leaned in again, straining to hear. The whisper was clearer this time. It was my name. That was it for me. I grabbed my coat, wallet, and keys, and I was out the door in under 30 seconds. I didn't stop walking until I was 3 blocks away, standing under the buzzing streetlight outside a 24-hour diner. My hands were shaking so bad that when I tried to text my friend Hannah to see if I could crash at her place, I had to retype the message 3 times. I stayed with her that night and told her everything the next morning. She tried to play it off. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone in the next apartment had the same name as me. But I could see the unease in her face. She told me I should call the cops just in case. So I did. An officer came out, walked through the apartment, checked the locks, and told me everything looked fine. He said if I heard anything again, I should call immediately. I wanted to believe that was the end of it. It wasn't. The next night, I triple-checked all the locks and even wedged a chair under the front door handle before going to bed. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the unmistakable sound of someone walking in my living room. Slow, heavy steps across the creaky hardwood. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. The footsteps paused, then continued, heading toward the bedroom. I slid out of bed, as quietly as I could, and grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the corner. My heart was slamming in my ears. The footsteps stopped just outside my bedroom door. I gripped the bat so hard my knuckles ached. Then, nothing. No footsteps. No sound. Just silence. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. When I finally worked up the courage to yank open the door, the living room was empty. Everything looked exactly the same as when I went to bed. The police came again the next day, but with no sign of forced entry and nothing stolen, there wasn't much they could do. By now I was sleeping less than 3 hours a night, jumping at every sound. I started leaving my TV on all night just to drown out the creaks and whispers. But 2 nights later, I learned the TV didn't help. I woke up to the faint sound of static, not from the TV in my bedroom, but from the living room. When I went to check, I froze in the hallway. The TV was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. And sitting in the middle of the coffee table was my phone, except I had left it charging on my nightstand. On the phone screen was a photo, a new one. It was me, sleeping. I bolted. I didn't care what time it was. I ran straight to my car and drove to Hannah's. When I told her what happened, she insisted I stay at her place until I figured things out. The next morning, we went back together so I could grab some essentials. Everything seemed normal at first, until I opened the door to my bedroom closet. In the far back corner, hidden behind a row of hanging clothes, was a small square cutout in the wall. I pulled the clothes aside and stared. The cutout led into a dark, narrow crawl space, and on the floor of that space was a thin mattress, a blanket, several empty water bottles, and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in foil. Someone had been living in my walls. We called the police immediately. They searched the crawl space and found a small backpack containing clothes, a lighter, and a pack of cigarettes, the same smell I'd noticed before. But the person who'd been living there was gone. The police said they'd increased patrols in the area and told me to stay somewhere else for a while. I didn't argue. A week later, I went back to get the rest of my things. The landlord had padlocked the crawl space, but the apartment still felt wrong. I was in the bedroom packing up when I noticed something on the wall above the headboard. Faint scratches like letters carved into the paint. I stepped closer and my stomach dropped. It was my name, over and over, scratched into the wall. I moved out that day. To this day, they never found the guy. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in my new place, I swear I hear it again, that slow, dragging scratch inside the wall, and I can't help but wonder if he's still out there looking for another wall to hide behind. It was close to midnight when I finally decided to call it quits for the day. I'd been on the road since 8 a.m., trying to push through the Kansas stretch of my cross-country drive. There's something about Kansas at night that feels wrong. Not in a supernatural way, just in a too empty way. The roads seem endless, the towns are miles apart, and the silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like you've been forgotten by the world. I was exhausted, my back ached, and the caffeine buzz I'd been riding since early afternoon had dissolved into a dull headache. So, when I spotted the dim neon sign for Highway Rest Inn, I didn't hesitate. The place was small, maybe a dozen rooms total, the kind of roadside motel where the parking lot is basically the front yard. One buzzing streetlight lit the cracked pavement, and the front office was a tiny glass booth with an old man inside, half watching a small TV propped up on the counter. I parked directly in front of the office, stepped out into the warm, humid air, and grabbed my wallet. Inside, the old man looked up from his TV. His face was saggy, not from age alone, but from the kind of weariness that makes you think he's been here for decades. "Just you?" he asked, voice gravelly. "Yeah, just passing through," I said, sliding my ID across the counter. He nodded slowly, then shuffled through a set of worn key tags hanging on hooks. He picked one, hesitated, then put it back, finally settling on a brass key with a faded 5 painted on it. "Room 5. he said, sliding it toward me. As I took it, I noticed the key for room 6 wasn't hanging with the others. The hook was there labeled in peeling black letters, but it was empty. "Are you full tonight?" I asked casually, just making small talk. He didn't look up from the paper he was scribbling something on. "Nah, just keeping some rooms closed for maintenance." The way he said it was clipped, almost like he wanted me to stop asking. I nodded and headed back outside. Room 5 was right next to room 6. As I walked down the row, I saw room 6's door was chained shut from the outside. Not just locked. There was an actual heavy-duty chain wound through the handle and bolted into the frame. A rusted padlock secured it in place. The blinds inside the window were drawn tight, but the way the curtain bulged slightly at the bottom made me wonder if something was pressed against it. I shook it off. It's not like I'd never seen weird motel stuff before. Sometimes rooms are shut down for pest control, or because of some plumbing disaster. I let myself into room 5. The place was what you'd expect for $40 a night. Musty carpet, 2 lamps that didn't match, a bedspread patterned with abstract shapes that were probably supposed to hide stains. I tossed my duffel on the bed and sat down, rubbing my eyes. All I wanted was a shower and sleep. The shower was lukewarm, but it did the job. I climbed into bed, flicked through channels on the TV for maybe 5 minutes before giving up and turning it off. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound as I drifted toward sleep. I woke up to a noise I couldn't place. It was faint at first, almost like the AC unit was straining, but then I realized it was coming from the wall. The wall I shared with room 6. It was a muffled sound, like someone speaking quietly, too quiet for me to make out words. I sat there in the dark, trying to decide if it was the TV in the next room, but it was past 1 a.m., and I remembered that room 6 wasn't supposed to be in use. The murmuring stopped. I lay back down. Maybe 10 minutes later, there was a different sound. Something dragging. A dull scrape, slow and steady like furniture being pulled across the floor. Then a sharp knock. Not on my door. On the shared wall. I froze. It came again. 2 quick knocks. Then silence. My skin prickled. I tried to tell myself maybe the owner had someone working in there late, fixing whatever maintenance issue he'd mentioned. But at 1:20 in the morning? That didn't make sense. I stayed awake for another hour, but nothing else happened. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The second night was when things got worse. I'd decided to stay an extra day because a nasty thunderstorm was rolling in, and I didn't want to risk driving through it. The storm hit hard that night, rain hammering the windows and wind howling through the gaps in the doorframe. Around midnight, I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I heard it again. The dragging sound. This time, it was followed by a thud. Then I heard something else. A whisper. I sat up, straining to hear over the storm. The whisper was faint, but I swear it was coming from the vent. I slid off the bed, crouched near the wall, and pressed my ear to the vent cover. "Help me." The voice was weak, trembling. My blood went cold. I whispered back, "Hello? Who's in there?" There was silence for a long moment. Then, "Don't tell him." I jerked back, staring at the vent like it might answer me. The storm rattled the windows again, and I told myself I had to be imagining it. But before I could convince myself, there was a different sound from room 6. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. They stopped right against the wall we shared. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I confronted the owner. I told him I'd heard noises in the empty room, even voices. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes did this weird darting thing like he was measuring what to say. "Probably the storm making the pipes rattle," he said finally. "Don't worry about it." I asked if he could open the room and check. "No," he said flatly. That was it. I went back to my room and considered just packing up and leaving. But a stubborn part of me needed to know. So that night, I waited until the office light went out and the parking lot was still. Then I stepped outside, raincoat over my pajamas, and crept to room 6, and the padlock was still there. The chain looked old, but solid. I knelt down, trying to peek through the small gap in the curtain. Something moved inside. I staggered back, heart pounding. The movement was small, like someone shifting on the floor. I was still staring when I heard the softest sound behind me, a footstep on wet pavement. I turned. The owner was standing there, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, eyes locked on me. "You shouldn't be out here," he said quietly. Before I could answer, there was a loud bang from inside room 6. Something slammed into the wall, hard enough to shake the chain. The owner didn't flinch. He just stepped forward, putting himself between me and the door. "Go to your room," he said, and there was nothing tired or worn in his voice now. It was sharp, commanding. I went. I don't know why I didn't argue, why I didn't run to my car right then, but something in his expression told me it wouldn't be smart. I left first thing in the morning. 2 days later, while stopped at a diner in Missouri, I saw a local news segment playing on the TV above the counter. It was about the Highway Rest Inn. Police had raided the property after a missing woman was spotted there by a passerby. She'd been chained inside room 6 for weeks. They showed a blurry still of her being led out on a stretcher. The owner was arrested for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and assault. When the waitress brought my coffee, she noticed I was staring at the TV. "You hear about that place before?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. I stayed in room 5. I live in a quiet suburb in Indiana, the kind of place where people leave their front doors unlocked and neighbors bring over extra zucchini from their gardens in the summer. My daughter Olivia is 8 years old. She's got this wild curly hair that refuses to be tamed and a laugh so loud it can cut through any bad day. I've been a single dad since she was 4. Her mom moved to another state for work and we keep things civil, but Olivia's with me full time. Most mornings I drop her off at school before heading to work. It's a routine we've perfected: coffee for me, chocolate milk for her, and a goofy game where she tries to guess the color of the first car we'll see on the drive. That's why it stood out to me that morning in late October, when she guessed white before we'd even turned the corner. Because sure enough, parked across the street from the school playground, there was a white panel van. No windows on the sides, just 2 in the back, and the paint looked aged, dirty, like it had been sitting for years in some forgotten lot. At first I didn't think much of it. It's a free country. People can park where they want, and maybe it belonged to a contractor doing work nearby. But when I picked her up that afternoon, the van was still there, in the exact same spot. The next morning, same van, same spot. And the morning after that. By day 4, it wasn't just me noticing. A few other parents in the drop-off line were muttering about it. One mom even said she saw a man sitting in the driver's seat with the engine running. But when she walked by, he tilted his head down like he was reading something. I started scanning the van every morning, trying to get a good look at the plates or the driver, but the angle and the glare off the windshield made it hard. Olivia didn't seem to notice, thank God. The last thing I wanted was to put fear in her head. That Friday, I made the decision to swing by the school at lunch just to see if the van was still there outside normal drop-off and pick-up times. Sure enough, there it was, now parked a little further down the street but still facing the playground. That's when my stomach started to twist. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they'd send a car to check it out. By the time I picked Olivia up that day, the van was gone. I figured maybe that was the end of it. It wasn't. The following Monday morning, the van was back. This time, closer than before. I could see a shape in the driver's seat, head tilted slightly toward the playground. I tried to catch his eyes as I drove past, but he turned his head toward the dashboard. That night, after Olivia went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop looking up white van near school and stranger danger reports Indiana. Nothing matched. No alerts, no news stories. It was like I was the only one taking it seriously. I told myself I'd keep my distance but keep watching. 2 days later, I woke up at 2:30 in the morning to use the bathroom. On the way back to my room, I passed the front window and happened to glance outside. Parked across the street from my house was the same van. I froze, just standing there in the dark, staring at it. It wasn't running. No lights on. But I could make out the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. After what felt like minutes, the van slowly pulled away, not speeding, just drifting down the street and disappearing into the night. The next morning, I kept Olivia home from school and called the police again. An officer came by, took my statement, and said they'd patrol the area more often. They also advised me to document any sightings with photos. For a week, nothing happened. No van, no sign of him. Then one evening, I got home from work to find an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a single photo of Olivia, taken from behind as she played on the swings at recess. I felt like I was going to throw up. I called the police immediately, but there were no fingerprints, no usable evidence beyond the photo itself. They told me to stay vigilant and keep my doors locked. The following days were a blur of hyper-awareness. Every time a car slowed near our street, I'd tense up. I stopped letting Olivia play outside unless I was right there with her. One night around 11:45, I was in bed when I heard a faint tapping sound. At first, I thought it was a tree branch against the siding. But when it came again, rhythmic, deliberate, I got up and crept to the living room window. The white van was in my driveway. Before I could react, the tapping stopped, replaced by the sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow, moving toward the front door. My phone was in my bedroom, but I didn't dare run back for it. I didn't want to make noise. A shadow passed by the frosted glass window beside the door. Whoever it was stopped, standing just inches away from me on the other side. Then, in the most casual conversational tone, a man's voice said, "She looks just like her mother." I backed away so fast I almost tripped over the coffee table. The footsteps retreated. The van's engine started. By the time I ran to grab my phone and call 911, it was gone. Police came within minutes but again found nothing. They promised to keep an unmarked car near the house at night. 2 days later, Olivia was at a friend's birthday party across town. I was enjoying the rare quiet when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo. Olivia in her friend's backyard eating cake. No caption. I called the party host immediately. She said everything was fine. Olivia was right there, laughing with the other kids. But when I asked if she'd noticed anyone strange nearby, her voice dropped. "Actually, there's this white van that's been parked down the street since we started." I didn't wait. I told her I was on my way and to keep Olivia inside. By the time I got there, the van was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room with the baseball bat across my lap, staring at the front window. Around 3 a.m., I must have dozed off because the sound of my phone buzzing jolted me awake. It was another text from the same unknown number. This one was a video. It was me. Asleep in the chair, mouth slightly open, baseball bat across my lap. The camera was so close I could see the rise and fall of my chest. My stomach dropped as I realized what that meant. He'd been inside the house. I called the police, but when they arrived, there was no sign of forced entry. Every door was locked, every window latched. They couldn't explain it. I replaced every lock in the house the next day and had security cameras installed. It's been 3 weeks since the last sighting, but every time I hear a van engine in the distance, my heart starts pounding. I walk Olivia into school every morning now, and I don't leave until I see her teacher take her inside. The cameras have never caught him, but sometimes at night, I wake up with the unshakable feeling that someone's watching me from the dark. And I know, deep down, the game isn't over. I've always liked poking around thrift stores and estate sales. There's something about digging through the forgotten leftovers of other people's lives that's always fascinated me. I never bought anything too strange, mostly old books, records, maybe a knick-knack or two. But one Thursday evening I stopped by this small, dimly lit shop in the older part of town. The kind of place wedged between two boarded-up buildings, with a flickering neon open sign in the window. The bell above the door gave a weak jingle as I stepped inside, the smell of dust and something faintly metallic hanging in the air. The place felt claustrophobic, aisles too narrow, shelves packed high with objects whose histories you couldn't guess at. In the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of broken lamps, I saw a battered cardboard box with a handwritten sign taped to the front. $1 each, old VHS tapes. Something about it pulled me in. The tapes were unmarked, just black plastic shells with faded, peeling labels. I picked one up and turned it over, expecting to see some movie title scrawled in Sharpie, but instead, there was only a number, 147, written in neat block letters. Every tape in the box had a similar number. No titles, no descriptions. I bought 3 of them on impulse. The man behind the counter, a gaunt figure with skin the color of old paper, didn't make small talk. He just slid the tapes into a plastic bag, his long fingers brushing mine for a second too long before he muttered my total. His eyes lingered on me as I left, and I swear he kept staring through the shop's grimy front window until I turned the corner. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I dug out my old VCR, plugged it into the TV, and slid in the first tape. For a moment, static hissed across the screen. Then it cleared to show a dimly lit basement. The camera was set up in the corner, unmoving. There was a single wooden chair in the center of the room. After a minute or two of silence, a man walked into frame. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. He stood behind the chair like he was waiting for someone. Eventually, another man was led into the shot, hands bound, mouth gagged. His eyes were wide and darting around like a trapped animal. The hooded figure placed a hand on the back of the chair, looked directly into the camera and said, "Lot number 147. Starting bid at 5,000. It took me a few seconds to process what I was hearing. The voice was calm, almost casual, but the words sank into me like ice water. The hooded man stepped aside, and I realized the camera wasn't just recording, it was broadcasting. I could faintly hear voices through the static, muffled but distinct, calling out numbers in rapid succession. The bound man was shaking violently, trying to shout through the gag. The rest of the tape was a blur of panic and disbelief for me. The bidding went on for what felt like forever, ending with the hooded figure naming a final number and saying sold. The screen cut to black. I just sat there on the couch, my skin crawling. My first thought was that it had to be fake, some messed up student film maybe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something about the rawness, the fear in that man's eyes was too real to be acted. I should have stopped there, but of course I didn't. The second tape was numbered 148. Same basement, same hooded figure. This time it was a woman, maybe mid-20s, tied to the chair. Her mascara was streaked down her face, her lips split open like she'd been hit. The bidding was quicker this time. At one point she looked straight at the camera and whispered something I couldn't hear. And then for just a moment her gaze seemed to shift, like she was looking past the camera, right at me. I turned off the TV and just sat in the dark, every shadow in the room suddenly feeling closer. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I'd throw the tapes out in the morning. But sleep didn't come easily that night. I kept thinking about that last look from the woman. The next day when I woke up, there was a fourth tape sitting on top of my VCR. I hadn't bought a fourth tape. The number written on the label was 149. I didn't even touch it at first. My apartment door had been locked. No signs of forced entry, but someone had been inside. My skin felt hot and prickly as I finally picked up the tape. This time, when the static cleared, my breath caught in my throat. It was my apartment. The same couch I was sitting on now. The same coffee mug still sitting on the table. And me, sleeping, curled under a blanket. A voice, low and amused, spoke from behind the camera. Lot number 149. Opening bids. Start now. I ripped the tape out, heart hammering, and ran straight to the police. I told them everything. The shop, the tapes, the man behind the counter, the new tape. They took the tapes but didn't seem convinced. They said they'd look into it and told me to stay somewhere else for a while. I crashed at my friend Mike's place for a week trying to pretend life was normal. But then Mike handed me a package one morning, saying it had been left at his door with my name on it. Inside was another tape. No number this time. Just the word finale written in red ink. I didn't want to watch it, but I had to know. Mike and I put it in the VCR together. The screen lit up to show the basement again, but this time, there were multiple chairs, all filled. And in one of them was me, bound, gagged, eyes wide with terror. Mike yanked the tape out before it could play further, both of us shaking. He called the cops again, and this time they took it more seriously. They went to the shop I'd described, but it was gone. Completely empty, as if it had never been there. I moved to a new apartment across the city. Changed my number. Stopped going to thrift stores. For months, nothing happened. Until last week, when I came home, there was a single VHS tape on my doorstep. No number, no words, just a strip of masking tape with today's date written on it. And I know, if I watch it, it'll be my last night alive. I met Logan James when we were 8 years old. We lived 2 houses apart in a quiet cul-de-sac in Maplewood, Oregon. And from the first day we spoke, we were inseparable. We played Little League together, built forts in the woods behind my house, and even managed to get suspended from middle school together for accidentally setting off the fire alarm during a science experiment. Everyone in town knew us as a package deal. If you saw me, you saw Logan. If you saw Logan, I was never far behind. We were brothers in every way except by blood. I'm 30 now, and for most of my life, I never once doubted that Logan was the kind of friend you could call at 3 a.m. and know he'd be there. But what I learned last year, it ruined every memory, every laugh, every single shred of trust I ever had for him. It wasn't like finding out your friend was cheating in poker or had lied about something stupid in high school. It was darker. It was horrifying. And the worst part is that I should have seen it coming. It started with a phone call in the middle of a rainy March night. My phone buzzed on my nightstand, and I groggily saw Logan's name. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said it might be serious. His voice was shaky, which was weird because Logan never sounded scared. He said his car had broken down about 20 miles outside of town on Highway 47, near those old abandoned grain silos. He needed me to pick him up. I didn't even think twice. I grabbed my keys and was out the door. That was the thing about Logan. I'd have driven through a blizzard for him. When I pulled up, his truck was parked awkwardly on the gravel shoulder, hazard lights flashing. He was leaning against the hood, smoking. Hood pulled up against the rain. I rolled down my window to shout over the storm. "You okay?" He nodded quickly, almost too quickly, and slid into my passenger seat. His clothes were wet, and I noticed his hands were trembling. Not from the cold, but like he'd just run 10 miles or been through something bad. I tried to get him to talk, but he brushed everything off, saying he'd explain later and to just drive. He gave me an address. Not his house, but an old property on the edge of town. It was a rundown, one-story place I didn't recognize. No porch light, no signs of life. The siding was warped from years of weather and the windows were dark. "Whose place is this?" I asked. "Just someone I know." "Thanks, man. You really saved my ass tonight," he said, avoiding eye contact. He got out quickly, giving me a quick wave before disappearing inside. I drove off, feeling uneasy. Over the next week, Logan was different. He stopped answering my texts right away. When we did hang out, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone or glancing toward windows. Once I caught him watching a house across the street while we were parked in my car eating drive-thru. It wasn't just casual people watching. He was locked in, focused, like a hunter waiting for movement. I asked if everything was okay and he just said, "Yeah, man, all good. You worry too much." But I knew something was wrong. I've known him since we were kids. I could tell when he was hiding something. Then came the night I made the mistake of going into his garage. We'd been planning to work on my old dirt bike, and Logan had told me to meet him there. He wasn't home when I arrived, so I let myself in through the side door. His garage had always been messy, but this time it looked staged. There were rows of neatly stacked storage bins along the wall, each labeled with things like tools, camping gear, and MISC. But one bin, shoved toward the back, had no label. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe instinct. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. Most were of random people around town, walking to their cars, leaving the grocery store, sitting in their living rooms. Some of the shots were taken through windows, some clearly without the person knowing. I flipped through, my stomach twisting tighter with each one. And then I saw her. It was my sister, Claire. She lives 2 towns over and has barely spoken to Logan since high school. The photo was of her making coffee in her kitchen, wearing pajamas. The angle was from outside, through the glass. My hands shook as I went deeper into the stack. There were more photos of Claire in different outfits, different days, even one of her sleeping on the couch. I felt sick. I dropped the stack back into the bin and stepped away, trying to make sense of it. That's when I heard Logan's voice from behind me. "What are you doing in here?" His tone wasn't playful. It was cold, measured. I turned, trying to play it off, but he stepped closer, blocking the door. The smile he gave me wasn't the one I grew up with. It was something darker, something that made my chest tighten. "You've been in here for a while?" he said, eyes scanning me like he could read every thought in my head. "Find something interesting?" I stammered out some excuse about looking for the socket wrench, but I could tell he didn't buy it. He walked past me, closed the lid on the bin, and locked it with a small padlock from his pocket. The whole time, he never broke eye contact. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory I had of Logan replayed in my head, now warped by what I'd seen. The way he'd randomly disappear for hours, the times he'd accidentally show up where I was hanging out, the way he always wanted to know where my family was. It all clicked in the worst possible way. I told myself I needed proof before I went to the police. I couldn't just accuse my best friend of being a predator without something solid. So I started following him. For a week I kept my distance, tracking where he went. I saw him park outside houses late at night and just sit there watching. Sometimes for hours. The last night I followed him. I wish I hadn't. He drove out past the old grain silos again, this time parking near that same run-down property from before. He got out, opened the trunk, and dragged something out. A large duffel bag that looked way too heavy for just clothes or gear. He hauled it into the house, and even from the road I could swear I saw it move. I called 911 right then. I told them everything. But by the time the police got there, the house was empty. The smell inside was enough to make the officers gag, metallic like old blood. But there was no one there, and no bag. Logan never came back to his own house after that night. His truck was gone, his phone disconnected. The police took my statement, but without concrete evidence, it felt like they were just waiting. It's been 8 months now. I haven't heard from him, but sometimes I get this feeling when I'm home alone, like someone's watching from outside. Last week I found an envelope wedged under my front door. No note. Just a single photograph of me sleeping in my bed. The angle was from inside my room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light on, gripping a kitchen knife like it could actually stop him if he decided to come in. I kept replaying every second of our friendship, wondering how many times I'd been inches away from the truth without knowing it. How many nights had he been out there standing just beyond my window? At around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some part of me needed to hear it. Still looking for that socket wrench? Logan's voice was calm, almost amused. "You were in my garage for a long time, man. I think you found something else." I didn't answer. My hand was slick with sweat, gripping the phone like it could anchor me. "I'm not mad," he continued. "Honestly, I'm impressed. You lasted longer than most people do." Click. I called the police immediately, but all they could do was take a report and suggest I stay somewhere safe. As if there was such a place anymore. For the next week, I stayed at a friend's apartment on the other side of town. It helped a little. Until the third night there, when we came home from grabbing takeout and found the door unlocked. My friend swore he'd locked it. Nothing was missing, but I noticed something on the coffee table that hadn't been there before. A small silver socket wrench. That was when I knew he wasn't just watching me. He was playing with me. I moved into a motel after that, changed motels twice. Each time I'd check every lock twice before sleeping. But then I started finding little things that didn't belong. A toothpick on the bathroom counter, a folded grocery receipt in the nightstand drawer, a penny placed perfectly in the middle of the pillow. He was letting me know he'd been there, and I was powerless to stop it. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago. I was pulling into the motel parking lot when my headlight swept across the far end of the lot. There he was, leaning against a lamppost, hood up, arms crossed, just watching me. I froze. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The message was clear. I could see him, which meant he wanted to be seen. I didn't go inside. I drove until sunrise, stopping only when the tank was nearly empty. But when I finally walked into my room the next morning, there was a note under the TV remote. 4 words, written in his handwriting. Lot number 150. Soon. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just personal. The photos, the watching, they were part of something bigger. The same way those numbered tapes worked in that other story I'd heard whispered about. He was marking me. Now, every creak in the wall sounds like a footstep. Every shadow outside the window could be him. I've stopped calling the police. All they ever do is arrive after he's gone. I've stopped telling friends where I'm staying. The fewer people know, the better. But I can't run forever. I think he's letting me tire myself out, wearing me down until the night he decides it's time. And when that night comes, I won't see him in the shadows. I'll wake up and he'll be there, sitting at the foot of my bed, smiling like he did when we were kids. And then I'll finally understand what lot number 150 really means.